Greetings. My name is Craig Clayton. Greetings. My name is Craig Clayton, and I'd like to begin this webinar with a few thank yous. Firstly, I'd like to thank Linkage for having the patience to allow me to, one, attempt this webinar initially while I was on a mission trip in Ethiopia. Unfortunately, as some of you know, the opportunity to complete that webinar did not pan out for technical reasons. Secondly, I'd like to thank those of you interested in this knowledge who have persisted to, one, go online and to then listen to a very poorly recorded with an incredible amount of background noise webinar that I attempted to record in an internet cafe while in Ethiopia. Lastly, I'd like to thank Linkage for allowing me to reschedule this webinar, but I also wanted to take the time this morning to record it, put it up online with a much clearer audio background and some additional information as well. Now, with my thank yous out of the way, let me begin by sharing a little bit of information on what this topic is going to be about, as well as what you were looking for when you initially logged on to take this webinar with Linkage. The topic of this webinar is on business acumen for diversity and inclusion leaders. My name, as I said earlier, is Craig Clayton, and I wear several hats. I'll give you my background in a little more detail in just a moment, but know that one of the things that I do is I'm the director of the International Institute for Diversity and Cross-Cultural Management at the University of Houston's Bauer College of Business. I also am the founder of a consulting organization. More on that in just a moment. I do want to take just a second to elaborate on why I was not accessible, as I've spent the last 30 days in both Kenya and Ethiopia doing mission work that wasn't planned relative to my trip, but when the opportunity availed itself, it was clear to me that I needed and was being guided to be there. It was a life-changing visit in so many ways, and just around the topic of diversity in and of itself, it's opened my eyes to things that I never realized about both myself and this wonderful country that we live in here in the United States. With enough of that background, let me move forward. I mentioned to you that I would share with you a little bit more of my background. Let me do that. One, as I mentioned, I have a consulting organization called the Spartacus Group. We're based here in Houston, Texas. And as you can see, we're a global consulting firm that specializes in providing organizations with executive strategy and business practices that create measurable processes to improve employee performance, productivity, profitability, and engagement. Our focus of late has been creating equitable workplaces and linking that to tangible business results, and organizational advantages. Within that context, we've been working extensively around the topic of workplace respect, as I've yet to meet an employee in any organization anywhere in the world suffering from too much respect at work. And the context of whether I do or don't respect you, or do or don't perceive myself to be respected, is often based on those differences with which we view people, whether they're generational, educational, gender, regional, and an array of other topics that impact the filter through which we see people around the topic of respect. There is also a correlation to this issue of respect and the bottom line for an organization relative to costs, the top line for an organization relative to revenue, and the pipeline for an organization relative to recruiting, retention, and talent management. The first term I'll give you from a business acumen standpoint worth embracing is the term margin enhancement. Because at the end of the day, that is everyone's responsibility, regardless of where you are hierarchically or what silo in the organization you operate in, but especially for those of us in diversity and diversity management, which way too often our job has been seen by those who don't understand it as being about compliance. The other hat that I also wear since 1999 has been the director and diversity strategist of the International Institute for Diversity and Cross-Cultural Management that I mentioned earlier is located in the Bauer College of Business at the University of Houston. The reason I emphasize the Bauer College of Business is because had the Institute been aligned with the School of Psychology or Sociology, I would have had no interest in working with them when the opportunity availed itself in the late 90s. this work has been deemed to be a right-brain social justice issue for far too long. My boss is a distinguished professor in accounting and taxation, left brain, and very analytical. His emphasis with me since coming on board has been to ground this work in the business of the business. To that extent, I've created a process called the Diversity Earnings Per Share Metric and have a corporate white paper that was published by Rutgers on the topic of the diversity profit equation, which is also available for you. More info on that as we progress through this webinar. One of the main reasons that the issue of earnings per share and the link of diversity has been so critical is that in a public corporation, if you really want to display business acumen, anchor your work to the earnings of the organization, you'll be surprised how quickly, at the C-suite level, they will then start to embrace this topic of diversity and inclusion. Now, one of the things that we do at the University of Houston to further embrace this issue of the business case and business acumen is that we were the first university in the country to develop a diversity management certificate curriculum. We started doing this in the late 90s. Subsequent to that, we have tailored the program to specifically deal with empowering those who are responsible for implementing their diversity strategy and processes with the tools that are necessary to be seen as strategic and linking it to business acumen. Well, we had to put the program in abeyance for over a year because the College of Business was just bursting at the seams as we grow at the U of H. We've just recently opened up a new wing to the College of Business in the last couple of months that has doubled the size of the College of Business. We now have the room and space to reinstitute our certificate curriculum, and that is a part of what I wanted to share with you as we begin this conversation, as it begins in April, the 1st through the 5th at the U of H. We also have launched a certification model that the U of H will now be issuing 2 levels of certification. 1, a CDP, Certified Diversity Professional, and 2, a CDE, Certified Diversity Executive. More info on both of these is also available if you take a look at our website, the diversitycertificate.com site that you see depicted here. Moving forward, I have met with numerous executives in numerous organizations at the C-suite level around the topic of business acumen and diversity. In the conversations I've had with them, they've made very clear that through their lens, the role of diversity and inclusion leaders has been changing dramatically over the years. Within that context, some of the things that they expect from the person heading up and leading their D&I processes and strategies are what you see depicted here, which I will cover in the context of this webinar. First, they expect the D&I leader to have external market knowledge as it relates to assisting the organization to be able to grow and focus their efforts in D&I in a way that illustrate an understanding of the markets. Secondly, they expect their D&I leader to use competitive intelligence. They also anticipate that the D&I leader understands current global and local trends. Additionally, there's an expectation that the D&I leader understands and is current with global socio-political environments. Fifth, that the D&I leader understands the impact of financial, economic, and market drivers on the bottom line. Sixth, that the leader understands core business strategies. 7, that he or she possesses solid financial acumen. 8, that the D&I leader has the ability to use multiple disciplines and sources to offer integrated ideas and solutions on issues important to the organization. 9, that the leader has a demonstrated ability to illustrate the ROI for diversity. 10, has the ability to communicate how D&I contributes to core business strategies. 11, that the D&I leader possesses the insights on how D&I contributes to both HR strategies and business results. And 12, that they have the ability to design and develop metrics that exhibit the ROI impact from diversity and inclusion. Let's get clear on a couple of quick definitions as we begin this conversation. One is on the topic of business acumen itself. What does it mean? Well, while there's multiple definitions, I've sort of honed in with what we do on a couple for the purpose of this webinar. First one is that it is keenness and quickness in understanding and dealing with a business situation in a manner that's likely to lead to a good outcome. Additionally, The term business acumen can be broken down literally as a composite of its two component words. One, the business literacy as defined in Sherm's business literacy, easy for me to say, business literacy glossary, is defined as the knowledge and understanding of the financial, accounting, marketing, and operational functions of an organization. Oxford Dictionary defines business acumen as the ability to make good judgments and quick decisions. At its core, if you can contribute to the organization's business drivers and have a general understanding of financial, accounting, marketing, and operational functions, you have an ability to demonstrate the business acumen that executives expect relative to what your role entails. Well, let's talk about financial terms because that's one of the first things people often will gravitate to when they start talking business acumen. There is literally a laundry list of acumen, and I should say acronyms, specific to financial terms. I'm not going to bore you with death by overhead and slide projector around all of the business terminology and those specific acronyms. But there are 5 or 6 that I want to take just a second to say, not only do you need to have at least a general understanding of the terms, but specifically how they apply in your organization. Because not every organization, one, institutes the same method of comprising what do these terms mean or calculating how do they drive the numbers. Example, first one is EPS, which most of us know as earnings per share. I know this may sound a bit simplistic, and let me frame a part of my intro into this conversation to say, many of you, this is old hat, so I don't intend by any means to make this sound like I'm preaching to the choir. But there are an awful lot of people who perform the diversity functions for an organization who've come up through more of a people management role versus the business side of the business. So I apologize for those of you that this information is second nature, but for some of you who may not necessarily have your arms around this terminology, I would encourage you to embrace it more. The first thing I'll say around EPS is not only understanding what does it mean, but understanding how it's calculated in your organization specifically. Understanding what your role is in D&I and how it can positively or negatively impact earnings per share. I'll give you a quick example. Most public organizations at the C-suite level can sort of top of mind tell you how many millions of dollars in cost savings equals a penny on an earnings per share basis. If you don't know what that number is in your organization, I encourage you to put your arms around that and embrace it. Because often the work we do in D&I can have a direct relationship to reducing organizational costs. When you can connect your work to having an impact on a quarter of a penny, half a penny, a full penny on an EPS basis, I assure you, you will have the attention of the executives and their perception on your business acumen will change dramatically. Second term, term from an acronym standpoint is a term EBITDA. In some organizations, the A is not used, it's just EBIT. There's other ways that this is calculated and driven in organizations, but it stands for earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. Understanding how EBIT is calculated and the impact it can have is a strategic differentiator for how you're viewed. The work we do in D&I can indeed directly impact the EBIT as it's calculated in an organization. Another quick side note. Many at the C-suite level are actually compensated on their ability to drive the goals the board gives them around this number. Another term worth understanding and embracing is a term OPEX. It's actually representing different things depending on your organization. As you see depicted here, it can be operating expense, operating expenditure, operational expense, operational expenditure. All of these basically are referring to an ongoing cost for running the business, products, or systems. Understanding and embracing OPEX as it relates to your organization illustrates your understanding of the business acumen to run a business or a product line within a business. CapEx is the counterpart to OPEX. CapEx refers to capital expenditure or the cost of developing and providing consumable parts for the products or systems that your organization delivers to the market. Again, understanding your organization's calculation of CapEx can also illustrate the business acumen to participate in conversations around what the board's emphasis may be around changing, addressing, or moving the number CapEx, OpEx, or EBITDA, all of which have a direct impact on earnings per share. The last two terms I'll share with you under this alphabet soup, if you would, are the terms ROA and ROE. ROA refers to the term that is return on assets. Return on assets tells how capital intensive a company is. A low ROA with huge assets can indicate poor asset usage by the company. These are terms that the investment community also looks at in determining efficiency and managing the organization's assets and earnings. Another term worth understanding is ROE. ROE refers to the term return on equity. This is a more significant number in the marketplace than ROA. ROE basically is the way in which an organization demonstrates how effective it is at using investor monies. This is a term that the organization is often going to be asked about from institutional investors who are looking to decide what level of investment they want to make in your organization. And while it's not on this list, while on that issue, let me share a couple of real quick points with you. One, if you're publicly traded, I strongly encourage you to go to either your internal financial documents or even online with a source like Yahoo Financial and discern what percentage of your stock is owned by institutional investors. Why is that important? Because in many publicly traded companies, that number can be 60, 70, 80, even 90% of the stock of the company is owned by institutional investors. What are those? Well, I'm referring to groups such as the retirement board for the teachers in California, or an array of institutional investors that represent financial markets and the monies that they're placing at significantly high levels in companies that they perceive to be in a niche that's growing. Why is this important to diversity? There's also a body of what's referred to as SRIs, socially responsible investors. These represent, the last numbers I saw was over $3 trillion worth of assets. And one of the first things they look at before they decide if they're going to invest in your company is, does the charter language of your board of directors include verbiage that says, when there's an empty seat on your board, that seat will be now reviewed through the lens of ensuring that there's a diverse slate of candidates available for that seat. It's similar in sports to what's been referred to as the Rooney Rule in the NFL, that ensures that the first step to gaining a diverse candidate pool is ensuring that there is diversity amongst those being selected to put in that pool. Let me clarify. I'm not saying that this group of institutional investors is insisting that the charter language of your board say the next person to come in when a seat avails itself will be a visibly diverse candidate. But that won't happen unless that pool of candidates being considered is diverse. If that language isn't in your board, they will automatically recommend to other SRIs not to invest in your company. How do you know what that language entails? There is one organization called Calvert, CALVERT.org, that is the largest. Calvert has on their website what that verbiage looks like that should be a part of the charter for your board of directors. And that, by the way, is public information relative to the charter language for your board. This is why this is a significant issue. Also, continuing with this conversation, other attributes that organizations are looking for from the diversity and inclusion leader as it relates to demonstrating business acumen includes an understanding of competitive intelligence. Well, there's two sources of competitive intelligence, which I'll elaborate on, but by definition, CI is the act of defining, gathering, analyzing, and distributing intelligence about products, customers, competitors, and any aspect of the environment needed to support executives and managers in making strategic decisions for an organization. When you can contribute to the competitive intelligence being gathered around both your organization and competition, it enhances the perception of your business acumen. Now, as I mentioned, there's two sources for competitive intelligence. First is external data. This traditionally refers to published information that's in the marketplace around things like, what are your competitors' future plans likely to be? Prices customers might be willing to pay. What's the best means of entering a market? This is traditionally seen through the lens of product competitiveness. However, as the topic of intellectual capital is increasing in organizations, meaning that in many instances, the true value of an organization lies between the ears of its employees. With the increased significance of intellectual capital comes the increased importance, competitive intelligence-wise, on what are organizations doing around their recruiting and retention practices. Understanding what those steps are in the marketplace for your competitors helps to enhance your business acumen and your perceived ability to contribute to the organization's processes around competitive intelligence. I mentioned there are two sources. The second source relative to this topic of competitive intelligence now refers to the topic of internal data. There is a wealth of information available from internal databases that will help you to gather competitive intelligence. Things like customer databases, web analytics, test marketing, all provide enhanced competitive intelligence to increase your business acumen and your perceived value from a strategic intelligence perspective. Your website, as an example, can yield a tremendous amount of competitive information, including who accesses your site, page by page, what page they're going to, how much time they're spending on a page, what site did they come from, and what site do they go to when they exit your site. It would help to know if your competition is taking a look at your information, if your customers or prospects are, whose site did they come from before they came to yours, whose site do they go to next when they leave yours. All of this data is available from a competitive intelligence standpoint. Additionally, with the recent trend of the importance of social media, many organizations are now adding to their list in their diversity department of staff someone whose responsibility is social media specific. Gathering data from sources like Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, and dozens of additional sources that fall under the social media umbrella can provide you with competitive intelligence around recruiting, retention, your competition, and your customers. Next, let's talk about this topic of business strategies. Under this umbrella of business strategy, let's start with a definition. The definition of business strategy is a long-term plan of action designed to achieve a particular goal or set of goals or objectives. In most organizations, management develops a game plan for strengthening the performance of the enterprise through their business strategy. There are aspects of the business strategy that you, as a D&I professional, need to be able to embrace, understand, and illustrate acumen around. There is a book from the Harvard Business Press that really defines the difference between what is an organization that's deemed to be best in class versus best practiced. Strategy is important, but what differentiates being best in class from being best practice, and let me be clear, best practices is what unfortunately too many organizations target their goals to be, when being best in class is what differentiates whether or not you're the lead dog or following the lead. And as the old poster in college I used to have said, if you're not the lead dog, then the view never changes. I think that the visual illustration of that is self-sufficient. While strategy is important, execution is the key in becoming best in class. Now, I've mentioned business strategy a couple of times. Let's take a couple of seconds to kind of elaborate a little bit on what's meant by that. Firstly, there's different types of business strategies. They're growth strategies, product differentiation strategy, price skimming strategy, acquisition strategy, and cost strategy. Elaborating a little bit. Growth strategy usually entails introducing new products or adding new features to existing products. These are the kinds of things that also allow you in the diversity seat to be able to help an organization define where the niches are around that growth strategy that might be prevailing because of changes in the dynamics of who's in the marketplace, as well as the product needs for those niche markets. Additionally, product differentiation strategy. Companies often use a product differentiation strategy when they have a competitive advantage, such as superior quality or service. I'll elaborate on a couple of those here in just a second. Price skimming strategy. This involves charging high prices for a product, particularly during the introductory phase, and then being able to recoup the costs necessary around production, advertising, and the R&D as you now start to reduce those cost factors as you reach a certain level of maturation in the marketplace with your product. Understanding, again, the nature of your organization approaches to these business strategies improves your business acumen and how they perceive you from a strategic perspective. Acquisition strategies are when a company that may have extra capital may use acquisition strategy to gain a competitive advantage. This normally entails purchasing another company or one or more product lines of that company to facilitate growth versus letting the growth happen organically. Cost strategy. This basically refers to examples of whether or not an organization wants to be seen as the cost leader, the luxury brand, or mass marketer, which let me elaborate a little on that because, again, understanding your organization's strategy, of which there is not just one, but multiple, facilitates your perceived ability to have the business acumen and to be strategic when you go into an organization and meet with the business unit leaders to talk about how you can help facilitate their success. Now, what do I mean in that niche relative to cost strategies? There's a number of ways organizations will pursue these things, normally linked to the organizational mission, vision, and the targeted goals as established by the board, investors, the marketplace, and the industry. Examples under that umbrella of cost strategy would include things like the Walmart example of being the low-cost leader, where they trade high margin for high volume to generate their ownership of a niche and or drive profit strategies. Another example would be the luxury brands that reduce high volume in exchange for a higher ROI by having higher margins. Lexus, Rolex, Neiman Marcus as an example of some of those luxury brands. Niche. These are organizations that focus on a narrow segment of the population, whether it's specific to leisure pursuits or healthcare concerns or sports, and they own one niche within the marketplace. And last is that area of mass market appeal, which is what it sounds like, where there's a broad range of product offerings and a broad range of consumers targeted across many demographics that, again, you need to understand where your organization is from a cost strategy perspective and what their goals are so that you can illustrate the business acumen to be seen as strategic in assisting them to grow in those niches. Understanding local trends is the next area that I will say under the business acumen umbrella needs to be a part of what we as D&I leaders are able to illustrate. Executives have given illustrations of this around when they have issues that are now going to affect workforce or workplace changes. Does the D&I leader understand the demographics of the marketplace, not just relative to your organization, but those competitively for those that you're now attempting to try to either grow your market into where they may own market share or to acquire a company that's in a niche and your understanding of the workforce and workplace changes and trends demographically, educationally, where the deficiency and changes are in those areas, such that, as an example, you acquire an organization that has a higher level of STEM-related skill sets needed, science, technology, engineering, and math. A part of what assists you in being strategic in that acquisition strategy is understanding what are the educational opportunities, advantages, deficiencies, and changes needed in the target markets that you're looking to acquire those specific organizations to help you with a growth strategy. If they're not available in the place you intend to relocate that corporate office to, then that information needs to be a part of the strategic changes and trends developed at an initial level and not on the backside when it's unfortunately too late to figure out why aren't we gaining the kind of skill sets we need from an intellectual capital standpoint. Another area to understand around both local and national trends involves legislative implications for the work we do. There is a huge area of opportunity and potential obstacles around, as an example, national legislation under what's called ENDA, or the Employment Non-Discrimination Act. Only because of time constraints, rather than drill down into what that entails in detail, I would just say, make sure you understand more about ENDA and how it could potentially impact your organization, current policies or needs to modify, because there's other examples, even on a statewide level, of bills that are pending that will greatly impact your workplace. Another example of that is under the category of what are called HWBs, or Healthy Workplace Bills. I've been fortunate to do a tremendous amount of research and have been blessed to be involved in both radio and television broadcasts on the topic of corporate bullying. It's unfortunate, but it is the new sexual harassment in the workplace. There have been 25 states that have attempted to pass healthy workplace bills to now address this issue of corporate bullying, because at the moment there is no state that has a law against it. The only city that even has a law against it is the city of San Francisco, has a law that's referred to as an anti-mobbing bill, because the term mobbing is what they use to define bullying in Europe. In Europe, most countries have laws against corporate bullying. If you're not cognizant of it, it would be to your advantage to, one, stay abreast of what's happening in the legislation. Two, if you're global in nature, understand the implications of what this could mean for your European workforce and the policies, practices, and what you expect of leaders in this area. Because as just a quick touch point, unfortunately, 8 out of 10 instances of bullying in the workplace occur manager to subordinate, which obviously puts the organization at fiduciary risk if these behaviors are as prevalent in your organization as they are in every other organization that has been surveyed. Understanding these court decisions allows you to now be ahead of the curve in changing how you operate and understanding what needs to be changed to create more equitable workforce opportunities and to potentially eliminate areas of risk around mitigation and reputational impact. Another area that executives are expecting the D&I leader to have their arms around is understanding the current global socio-political environment. The key areas of knowledge and awareness in this space involved understanding geopolitical concerns as it relates to your organizations. Where are your business operations? Where are the physical facilities? Where are your suppliers located? Where are locations that your supply chain could be impacted? The impact of global socio-political issues in these areas are extensive. There is a tremendous amount of work being done in some countries to acquire everything they can in the supply chain that would be materials and resources that can help them to expand the opportunities for production, manufacturing, and changing the face of their country. Depending on what those items are and what your current supply chain looks like, understanding these social political trends can have an impact on your organization's success. The political aspect of that and socio aspect of that involve things like what's occurred with what was referred to as the Arab Spring and how that might potentially affect existing business relationships, manufacturing, and product sourcing, not just the business acumen linked to your own organization's operations and facilities, but as it relates to your suppliers and your competitors' suppliers, where your competitors obtain their products and how these implications could change for them allows you to again illustrate the acumen necessary to be strategic. Clearly, there is a benefit to your knowledge set to be abreast of these issues and changes, to be able to address the business plans, staff changes, reductions, and/or eliminations as it relates to what you do as an organization, and additionally around the area of merger, acquisitions, product and subsidiary spinoffs. The global socio-political environment is greatly impacted by all of these areas and your understanding of them. Let me give you a quick example of where low-hanging fruit is in being able to illustrate business acumen around diversity and inclusion work. Specifically of the 3 silos that most of us embrace in this work, workforce, workplace, and marketplace, I'm going to stay within the area of workplace and workforce specific issues. Most of us are already aware of the significant cost of turnover as it relates to our organization. However, there isn't another term that we use at the University of Houston beyond that of turnover that's referred to as turn under. Turnover is when people quit and leave. Turn under is when they quit and stay. Unfortunately, turn under is even more impactful than turnover, but there's very little work and research on that topic. I will share some of that with you in another webinar because there's a significant opportunity to be able to impact our bottom lines by addressing that topic. Let me stick with the issue of turnover as an example. In this illustration, this organization has turnover, hypothetically, that's at 7%, voluntary. Population-wise, we're talking about an organization of 15,000 people. 7% turnover in an organization of 15,000 people is slightly more than 1,000 people per year walking out that revolving door of turnover, voluntary again. How do we now start to connect the dollars to this? If the average salary is $50,000 and the associated overhead connected with that salary is 25%, that makes the total comp number 62.5. Most studies around the topic of turnover replacement is at about 150% of the total comp number. 150% of that 62.5 is $93,750 turnover replacement cost per person. When you multiply that 93,000 times the 1,050 people, that's turnover at 7%. You're talking about turnover replacement costs in this organization of $98.4 million per year. Here's where a couple of the assumptions connect to the diversity work come in. We've been able to quantify that the prevalence of derailing behaviors in organizations is so significant that upwards of 70% of employees have encountered bullying, disrespectful behaviors, acts of incivility, broken dignity entitlements, an array of behaviors that clearly impact employees' willingness to give their best effort at work and even desire to stay with an organization. Now, we're not going to assume that 7% turnover we referenced earlier was all linked to this topic of derailing behaviors. But if these behaviors are that prevalent, let's assume that only 25% of people left because of them, which is a conservative number. 25% of that $98 million in turnover is $24.6 million in turnover linked to derailing behaviors that's often driven around do I or don't I respect you, around the differences, generational, gender, ethnic, educational, any one of those that fall under this diversity-related turnover umbrella. In this organization, as I mentioned to you earlier, you need to be cognizant of what do cost savings and the amount of them equate to on an EPS basis. The number in this organization is at $30 million in cost savings equals a penny on an earnings per share basis. When you can now equate the impact of the diversity efforts you're engaged in and earnings in the organization, you have the attention of the senior leadership team. In this case, we're talking about an impact that equates to almost a penny on an earnings per share basis. This illustrates the acumen that clearly will get you to the C-suite. And the next question that's inevitably come up when these numbers have been illustrated in organizations is, what do you need from me from a budget standpoint to help me get a portion of this money back? Because the one thing I can assure you of, if your organization misses its EPS commitment to the market in any given quarter by as much as a penny, there will be an immediate negative response in the marketplace. Market capitalization will drop. Investors will start looking for other places to put their money. And there are many people at the board level who will begin to question, why is the leadership team not achieving the level of earnings that we're committed? This begins a process of driving business acumen. The term ROI and our ability to connect to it. One of the other areas that's specific to executives' requests for D&I professionals to be able to demonstrate an ability to impact is, how do you link D&I work to the ROI numbers that we often hear cited? Well, I gave you one illustration in just that preceding slide. First of all, you need to understand, how is ROI calculated? We were just looking at the bottom line and the implications around this issue relative to cost reductions. However, there's other aspects of ROI that need to be calculated around what's the implication from a top line revenue growth perspective. There are multiple examples that, just because, again, of time constraints, are not detailed in this conversation relative to what we do to demonstrate business acumen. However, be aware that there are many ways to link increased revenue to diversity and inclusion. Example, improved market share in niches that have traditionally not been owned by your organization or can be expanded. As you know, if you're a consumer-based organization, the ethnic composition of the consumer marketplace is changing dramatically. When you look at the gender and age-specific growth in various segments of the marketplace, they too present tremendous growth opportunities. Being able to demonstrate a way to take a larger share of those niche and markets also illustrates the ROI necessary to be perceived as having the business acumen, allowing organizations to see our role as strategic. Supplier diversity is another quick area that I'll share some insight on, that there's research we've done at the Institute at the behest of organizations connected to the National Minority Supplier Development Council that demonstrate when organizations are perceived by customers to be doing the things that are best practiced and receiving recognition for best practices in the area of supplier diversity, there is an increased likelihood per customers of them retaining their relationship with you, the supplier of goods and services, because of your success in those areas. The ability to connect to customer retention, win backs, an array of other metrics that we have documented and have some information we can share, now again help to facilitate your understanding of business acumen and your ability to be deemed as strategic by growing markets. Being able to demonstrate vertical and horizontal market penetration around the top line revenue growth in the niches that are expanding also illustrate your business acumen and your strategic value. When it comes to topic of the bottom line and cost reductions, we've also done some research around the topic of being able to integrate what would be referred to in some cases as employee suggestion programs that now give you the ability to link back the efforts of having a corporate culture that is inclusive, because there is a direct connection between an inclusive, respectful culture and the level to which employees participate in employee suggestion programs. For example, if I don't deem the culture to be accepting and willing of my input, I'm certainly not bringing forward the ideas and recommendations I have around eliminating waste, duplication, new product suggestions and ideas, an array of things that we specifically quantified in some studies around the impact of employee suggestions on just the bottom line, not even referencing the implications on the top line and the pipeline. There are ways to be able to make this connection, but having the business acumen again to have these conversations drives the value with which you're perceived organizationally. There's also connections now relative to decreased levels of productivity in the organization based on employees encountering the derailing behavior and disrespect that we referenced earlier. There's also a connection between increased discretionary effort in measurable ways, which has an impact on the top and bottom lines when an organizational culture leaves an employee feeling valued and respected. What discretionary effort is the effort above what's required to be seen as fulfilling your obligations versus giving what you're fully capable of. If you want the best from people, which is what high-performing work teams drive, they have to feel valued and respected, or they revert back to doing just what's required to avoid being seen as slacking off. And again, we have studies and research that connect these topics. This is why it's so important to be able to illustrate your business acumen by learning to speak the language of the C-suite. Executives manage by numbers and not by their feelings. After all, when you can measure it, they can manage it. There's more information in the corporate white paper I referenced earlier called the Diversity Profit Equation that gives you specific metrics and numbers on how this is calculated. As a part of the diversity certificate program we mentioned, we also have templates available that allow you to calculate the impact on your bottom line specifically, driving the numbers linked to your own organizational profitability that give your leaders a chance to see that you are indeed driving these numbers. My email address for more information is craig@craigclayton.com. Also, just to reiterate, we certainly hope to get a chance to see you at the Diversity Management Certificate Curriculum April 1st through April 5th. That is at the University of Houston's Bauer College of Business. More info at diversitycertificate.com. Just a quick side note, this certificate curriculum is a prerequisite to the ability to obtain diversity certification in either of the categories CDP or CDE. So if your goal is to be able to get the certification from the U of H, we certainly need to see you in one of the certificate curriculum courses. Lastly, a couple of books worth adding to your personal reading library around this topic of business acumen. I am not connected to any of these authors, nor do I own stock in Amazon.com, but 4 of the books I would encourage you to consider. One is Business Acumen, as you see depicted here, by Dr. True. Second is What the CEO Wants You to Know, using business acumen to understand how your company really works, also available through Amazon. Next is Seeing the Big Picture, using business acumen to build your credibility, career, and company, also available through Amazon. Last is the book I referenced earlier called The Knowing-Doing Gap from the Harvard Business Press. Once again, I'd like to thank Linkage for this opportunity to present this information. I realize that you have lots of sources for data and knowledge and skill set enhancements. Linkage, however, is clearly the leader in this space, and I'm very proud to be associated with their diversity conference that's held in Atlanta. I would strongly encourage you, if you have not participated, to sign up. We look to see you in Atlanta, and we hope that you will participate with Linkage in other webinars and activities going forward. Thank you once again for this opportunity. Have a great day.